All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's open forum. Today we have a very special guest to talk to us about seller financing. Anita Malick, founder and president of The Closing City. And you guys read my intro on her. She's very educated and very smart and very wonderful. And we are very glad she is here. So Anita, if you would like to talk to these fine people, and I'm sure they'll have questions for you. I get questions on seller financing all the time, and I tell them to talk to someone smart. So here you are. And please take over. Thank you.
Absolutely. Can I share my screen? Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. You know how to do it?
I do know how to do it.
Awesome.
Let's see.
Most people are Zoom trained, and this is a little different.
Can you see my screen?
We will in a second.
Okay. Let me know if you can.
Yeah, you're sharing the screen.
But I'm sharing, yes. Okay, hold on. See, I'm not as smart as you think.
All right, yeah, maybe we should just cancel this whole thing.
Let's see. Maybe this will work. Let me know if this works.
Yes.
Okay. Can you see that PowerPoint?
Yes, now we can.
Okay,
perfect.
Great. Okay. Let's see. Okay, give me one moment. Sorry. Okay, here we go. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Anita Malick, and I'm with the Closing City Title and Escrow Company. And it's such a pleasure being on this call today. I admire this group right here. I have been working in real estate and with agents for most of my career life, and I did my growing up in this field. And I love it when I meet enthusiastic teams with passion and ambition. So Ryan, kudos for this beautiful forum that you set up, and thank you for allowing me to be here today. I'm super excited. And today our topic is seller financing, but before that, I just wanted to share with you a little bit about who I am. My name is Anita Malick, and I have a very boring job. By trade, I'm an attorney. However, I actually love what I do. I've been in real estate law since 2010. I had a real estate practice in Illinois. I do not practice in Florida anymore. I don't practice law here. I'm still licensed in Illinois. And the reason I don't practice law here is because I actually love running a title company. And I say this with all my heart, but I've probably sat over 1,000 closings in my career, and it never gets old for me. I love what I do. I have represented buyers, I've represented sellers, I've represented lenders, and it's just especially sitting in that room with the first-time home buyers, and just seeing that excitement and just being able to be a part of that chapter and hear their story. It sincerely never gets old. I have a wonderful staff, and they do all the closings at the Closing City. They're all experienced, but every once in a while, I will still go in and say, can I sign your buyer today? Because I just want to sit in that room with them and be able to feel that excitement. So this field is such a beautiful field. We're really helping people buy and sell, and it just really never gets old. It truly doesn't. So that's what led me here at the Closing City, because that's what we do. We're one of the fastest growing title companies here in Florida. And this is my background. My role at the company is I'm the issue spotter, the trainer. So I get involved in any complex matters. I have agents reaching out to me all the time. And I know you guys have wonderful leadership and a wonderful brokerage. And if there's anything that you guys think that I can answer, please feel free to reach out. I get questions about seller financing. I get questions about this thing called subject to transactions. I don't know if you've heard of those. or I'll get questions about how can I verbalize this addendum, or can you explain this paragraph of the contract to me? And I'm always happy to share knowledge when I can. So that's who I am. And today, I'm happy to talk a little bit about seller financing, what it is, and what do you do if you're in a situation where the parties think seller financing is the best way to go. So let's start with a definition of seller financing. Seller financing is when a property seller lends money directly to the buyer. So the seller essentially becomes a lender. And one big thing to remember if you're in a transaction of seller financing, one piece of advice that you can give to your client is that in a seller financing, that relationship between a seller and buyer continues beyond the transaction. So in a normal transaction where there's no seller financing, on closing day, buyer and seller say congratulations to each other, exchange keys, exchange the deed and the money, and they move on, right? But in the seller financing, that relationship goes beyond the closing date. They now become lender and borrower, and it will continue until the loan is fulfilled. And the deeper meaning behind that is both seller and buyer absolutely have to feel comfortable with each other. They have to feel comfortable with the terms of the loan. They have to make sure they've underwritten each other, because that relationship will go on and on. So if you do have a seller or a buyer that's thinking about doing a seller financing, that's sort of the the tone of the transaction. And that's this sentence right here, this relationship going beyond the closing, is something you want to keep in mind throughout this transaction. So the first step is, if you're in the situation of seller financing, obviously either a seller or a buyer will raise interest, right? And obviously the only way it can work is the seller has to have ample equity in the property. So most of the time the sellers either have paid off properties or they have a very little payoff, enough equity where they can actually lend money to the buyer, right? So that's the first thing you want to look for, that is the seller in a position to offer seller financing, right? And the next thing is the seller and the buyer are going to underwrite each other, right? Seller wants to make sure buyer is a healthy borrower, and buyer wants to make sure seller is a healthy lender, right? How do you do that? So seller's going to look for certain things. Seller wants to make sure the buyer is financially stable and strong. Does the buyer have a job? Does the buyer have income? Does the buyer have proof of funds for down payments? Most sellers, and once again, all terms are negotiable between the parties, okay? All terms are negotiable. Usually the seller wants to make sure the buyer has some kind of down payment, maybe 15, 20, 25, 30%. They want to make sure the buyer has skin in the game, because that's how you know the buyer is serious. The buyer will make those monthly payments. And in the unfortunate event, if the buyer defaults and the seller does need to take the next steps, perhaps a foreclosure, if there's enough equity in the property, that would cover the foreclosure costs, and all of that. So that's one of the reasons sellers want to make sure that down payment amount is something healthy. Seller will want to get verification of income. And then seller will want to think about the loan terms. How much do they want to lend? What interest rate do they want to lend at? How long do they want to lend for? Who will prepare the lender documents? What other clauses or terms do they want to see in these lender documents? And then seller is also going to think about enforceability. What if the buyer stops making the payments? What are seller's options? What are the next steps? So that's the underwriting that the seller is doing. And this underwriting typically happens prior to entering into a contract, right? Some of it might happen while they're under contract, but a lot of it is happening prior to entering the contract. The buyer is also going to want to underwrite the transaction, right? Buyer wants to make sure seller is a qualified lender, someone they feel comfortable to borrowing from, right? Buyer is going to want to do extra due diligence of property, including inspections and appraisal. Buyer is going to want to make sure the association is healthy, whether it's a condo association or HOA association. And if you think about it, these are some of the things a bank would do, right? A bank that's lending money is going to do a credit check on the buyer. They're going to do a verification of income. They're going to look for proof of funds. They're going to have buyer fill out application. They're going to do an appraisal to the property. And if there's an association, the lender also reaches out to the condo or HOA association and has the association fill out a questionnaire, because if they're going to lend money, they want to make sure it's a healthy association, right? That there's enough reserves, especially if there's a condo, have all those inspections been done for structure, and or are there too many defaults in the condo association, too many people not paying? So the health of the HOA is very important, and this is normal for any buyer as well, right? But because there's no bank, now the buyer and the seller have to be the underwriters and do this investigation, research, all of that. And the buyer also wants to think about what loan terms do they want? You know, what amount do they want to borrow? What's their ideal interest rate? What can they afford on a monthly basis? So this is called the underwriting process between seller and buyer, and it happens prior to entering into contract. Also, prior to entering into contract, as they're doing this underwriting, they're going to come up with the loan terms. Once again, how much is the seller lending? What's the term of the loan? Is it a 3-year loan? Is it a 5-year loan? Is it a 1-year loan? And everyone's situation is different, right? Maybe the buyer just needs a 1-year seller financing loan until they're in a position to get a traditional loan from a bank, right? Or whatever the case may be. So depending on the situation, the two parties are going to work out what their terms are. What's the maturity date? Is this a balloon payment? And a balloon payment is when the loan amount is due lump sum at the end of the term of the loan. What's the interest rate? The two parties will have to talk about, will buyer pay monthly interest only? Will the buyer pay interest and principal? And amortization table should be worked up because, you know, before they sign the contract, they can punch in their terms and be very clear what those monthly payments will look like. So there's no ambiguity, there's no discrepancy. So the more they work out these terms prior to the contract, the better. What would the late fee be? What would the prepayment penalty be, if any, if the buyer can pay back sooner? What happens when there's a default? What kind of notice does seller need to give to buyer? And then there's this cool federal act called the Dodd-Frank Act and the Truth in Lending Act. So the parties have to make sure, you know, any requirements under those act are followed, because we want to make sure the transaction is legal as well. And a lot of this is where an attorney comes into play, right? So I highly recommend that there should be an attorney involved whenever there's seller financing, because that attorney will make sure that the intent and the loan terms are captured and the lender docs are prepared accordingly. So these are the conversations that will take place in seller financing and the things to think about. Like I said, one popular thing, a great tool is what's called an amortization table. And there's so many free calculators out there. My favorite one is mortgagecalculator.org. It's pretty cool. You know, you can punch in the numbers and it whips up an amortization table for you, because that's the number one concern. What am I getting paid? Every buyer will ask, what's my monthly payment like, right? So these are pretty easy to whip up. You can go to the calculator and let's say, for example, seller is selling for $400,000. Seller wants $60,000 down payment. So the loan amount would be $340,000. And let's say the parties agree on a 5% interest rate. Let's say the seller does want a 1-point origination fee for underwriting and doing everything they need to. And maybe the parties agree that the monthly payment will be on a 30-year amortization and a 3-year balloon payment. So what that means is the length of the loan is only 3 years. So buyer is only borrowing for 3 years. At the end of 3 years, borrower will pay back the balloon sum principal. So if they're borrowing $340,000, that $340,000 could be paid back as a lump sum at the end of the 3 years, or during the 3 years, there could be monthly payments, and maybe the parties agree that buyer will pay principal and interest every month, and then whatever's left over, a big balloon payment would be made at the end of 3 years. And a lot of times buyers may want a longer amortization. So even though the length of the loan is only 3 years, they may want to use a 30-year amortization. So those monthly payments are not too overwhelming, and it mimics what a traditional bank would have set up on a 30-year loan. So whipping one of these up is amazing. You can even add it to the contract. That way, once again, there's no discrepancy. So once the two parties have finalized their terms, you would proceed to drafting the contract like you normally do. So I know the FAR Bar As Is contract is one of the most popular ones used. So if that's the one you're going to use, you will draft it like normal. But the only thing that will be different is that you're going to attach what's called the rider C. It's called the seller financing rider. And this is where you will insert the terms that the parties have agreed to, and you will attach this to the contract. Rider C, this is the first page of it. This is where it has the disclosure of the Dodd-Frank Act and the Truth in Lending Act. If your seller is the first time lender, doesn't frequently lend, then really they're excluded from further disclosures. If your seller is a frequent lender and they finance lots of transactions, then there are a couple more steps involved, and there's a couple limitations on it, and they do have to give extra disclosure. But once again, this is where the attorney will come in. They will ask the right questions. They will ask the seller if they're a frequent financer or is this their first time, and based on that, the attorney will draft those documents and make sure the proper disclosures are put in. The second page of the rider, this is what it looks like. And basically, this is where you would fill in the terms that the two parties have agreed to. So at the top, if the loan was $340,000 at 5% interest, and then you would either choose A, B, C, or D, depending on what the parties decide. And then that's your rider, and it gets attached to the contract. This is actually my last slide. There are a few other considerations that you may want to bring up, or the attorney may bring up. And, one of the things when I've represented buyers or sellers, and I know you guys experience this as you are agents of your buyers and sellers, they often ask, how can I get out of the contract if I need to? What is my exit clause? Nobody wants the contract to fall apart, but there are some contingencies that protect the buyer and they protect the seller, right? In a traditional closing where the buyer is getting a loan from the bank, one of the strongest contingencies is the financing contingency. So if the buyer is not eligible or lost their job or can no longer get a loan, as long as they terminate in that financing contingency period, they can get their escrow deposit back and they can walk away. So same thing with seller financing. You may have a seller ask or a buyer ask, what's my exit options? What if this doesn't work out? Or what if, as we're underwriting each other while we're under contract, we realize we're not the right fit to be in a seller financing? So you want to make sure you think about what contingencies are you placing in the contract. So the first contingency a lot of buyers like to put in is the appraisal contingency. The buyer wants to make sure the property is going to appraise, right, for the purchase price before they put money into it. So you can add an appraisal contingency with your contract. Another contingency you can write in, and I like this one, in paragraph 20 additional terms, you can write in, this contract is contingent upon attorney review and approval. And that way, during that inspection phase, during the contract phase, while the attorney is drafting the lender documents, if for some reason either party is not happy with the transaction or the terms or the deals or something doesn't make sense, they can exit out of it. Also, obviously you want to put the inspection contingency in there because that'll give your buyer, their 10 days or 7 days to do the inspection, make sure the house itself is good. Another consideration is auto debit payments to the seller. So, at the closing, the buyer could fill out an auto debit. Maybe the seller says, okay, I want to make sure I get my monthly payment every third day of the month. And The buyer can fill out an auto debit form on the spot and set it up, and that gives a little bit more comfort to both parties. The last thing to consider as the seller is you want to make sure the property remains insured, right? So in a seller financing, it's important to remember the ownership is going to be transferred to buyer at closing. So it's like a normal closing. A deed will be executed. The buyer becomes the owner of the property, right? So the buyer is the owner, but the seller is the lender. So seller still has a vested interest in the property. Seller still wants to make sure as a lender, the property is insured and it's protected and all property taxes are paid. So your seller may ask buyer, hey, on the day of closing or prior to closing, I need to see proof of homeowner insurance. I want to make sure I'm listed as an additional insured on your homeowner insurance. And I want to make sure the property taxes are paid every year and you need to show me proof of that. So that's another term that the two parties may want to discuss prior to and be on the same page. But if these considerations and if the discussion and the dialogue, if it's open and if it's transparent, I've seen a lot of seller financing that is successful. Like I said, most parties want to get into seller financing either because maybe the buyer doesn't qualify for a traditional loan or the seller just wants to move it off the market quicker. And sometimes my seller financing deals are done within 2 weeks. If the parties have figured out what the terms are, and if they feel comfortable with it, it could be done within a couple weeks. And sometimes it doesn't work out. Sometimes they talk about it and they're like, no, I don't want to be in this. And, so it's good for the two parties to vet it out, to be very strong with what terms they want. And then I highly recommend they get an attorney involved. I've been in deals where, as title companies, we could even draft the loan, the mortgage and the note. So we can do that. And we do that often. But I always say, hey, if you can get an attorney, that attorney can, make sure that everyone's questions are answered as well. We do have an in-house attorney at the Closing City. His name is Steven. He's amazing. And he does help out with a lot of seller financing deals. Usually he won't represent the buyer or he won't represent the seller. He'll be the neutral in the middle attorney who will draft the documents so both buyer and seller can review it. But by all means, buyer can have their own attorney and seller can have their own attorney. Why not? And a lot of times people ask me, who pays for the attorney fees? It's negotiable. Most of the time, the buyer will pay for it because the buyer wants the loan, right? So the buyer will pick up the attorney fee. But once again, that's negotiable between the two parties. But that's really it on seller financing. And I know, Ryan, you probably you're such a great mentor, but even in my years, one of the phrases I like to use, and I tell all the agents that I train and I work with, is that aside from being a real estate expert, when it comes to the other topics, you want to be the jack of all trades, master of none kind of thing. And so the more you can learn a little bit about every topic, the better it is. So you don't have to be the expert on seller financing. But if from our discussion today, if you can take away 2 to 3 points and at least know how to navigate the conversation and direct your buyer or seller to the right resources, you'll have a leg up more than any other agent because you know how to talk about it. You know what seller financing is, you know what the steps are, and you know who to get involved. And that will always give a leg up. So the more you can learn about these little things, the better. And of course, you want to talk to your broker, you want to talk to your team leader that does it make sense in this transaction? Like I said, not every transaction is cut out for seller financing, but once in a while it works out. And I'm always here to take your questions. Like I said, this is what I do all day. I answer questions and I'm happy to walk anyone through it. So I'll open it up to any questions. Ryan, did I miss anything?
No, we don't have anything in chat until just now. So Ernest just asked a question in the chat. Why can't the seller take back a loan? Well, I just ran out of time. Why can't seller take back a loan for the down payment and get a conventional loan for the first?
Why can't a seller take out a loan for the down payment?
Take back a loan for the down payment and get a conventional loan for the first.
Yeah, absolutely. So this, and you'll notice in this, the rider, the first question that asks is this a first mortgage? Is seller giving a first mortgage or a second mortgage? So we've seen that too, where the first mortgage is a normal conventional mortgage, and then the down payment might be coming from the seller. Now, does the seller want to take that risk? Do they want to like tie up all the equity? And then does the traditional lender allow that, right? So those are some considerations to think about. But I've been in situations where there's a transaction. The first lender is maybe a private lender, doesn't care where the down payment's coming from. And the second loan is actually from the seller.
Okay. Anita, can you share your contact information?
Absolutely. Yeah,
right.
absolutely.
I'll do it, Anita. If you want
Okay.
At least your email. If you have a certain number you want them to call.
Yes. My email, do you want me to give it to you here? You want me to put it in the...
I just put it in the chat.
Yeah, okay.
And if you want to put your phone number in there, you can. Whatever you want them to call you at.
Absolutely. Any other questions while I'm entering this?
I certainly have some. We've got some hands up too.
Okay, perfect.
So we'll get to you there. Vivian, you have a question?
Well, one thing is I've already sold myself as a seller financing seller. And the one thing that my title company didn't do for me was get me a prepayment penalty. So he actually paid me back sooner than I thought he would, which in a way was good because I was able to walk away and wash my hands, which is always a positive thing. But in a way, it kind of cut me short on some money I was counting on. So I've learned that, but I'm in the same position now where I could do another seller finance. And the situation is, I would want them to be able to take out a loan against any repair and, upgrades and just bringing it into the 21st century that I don't want to do or spend money on. Is that something that's like they could get a loan for like $100,000 or whatever for any finishing, and then I would hold the note for the difference?
Absolutely. The two parties can negotiate any terms that they want. So you can set it up however you want, as long as, so you would still be the primary lender for the 100,000, or are you giving a second mortgage?
No, they would borrow that from somebody else, and I'm just throwing that number out. They may not need to borrow that much. Depends on what their aspiration is, I guess. But if, let's say they borrowed between 50 and 100 and the house is worth 400 now, but it's going to be worth 550 after they fix it. Is that how I fix the appraisal rate after repair value, or do I fix it on what I'm conveying to them right now?
I would fix it at after the repair value, because you don't know at what point of the fixture this could default in, right? Okay. So you definitely want the higher amount to protect yourself in case the default happens either prior or to after them fixing up the property. And I think the key is, like you said, as long as there's enough equity, even if you take the pre-improvement amount, the 400,000, you still want to make sure there's enough equity that if you do have to foreclose, or you have to take the next steps, there's enough money to cover attorney costs, fees, things like that. So you're not out of pocket and then having to hunt down a deficiency judgment from someone that may not be able to pay it.
I'm going to contact you personally. And also, can we, as a seller financing, because I have sellers I'm trying to kind of talk through some of this, would it behoove you to have an escrow account for taxes and insurance like you would if you had a primary lender?
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of goes back to the underwriting process. So it goes back to how strong you feel that the buyer is during this underwriting. So if you feel that maybe if they show me proof of insurance at closing, so I know 1 year is covered, and then your note and mortgage could have clauses that if they cancel the homeowner insurance, you could go on their behalf and get the homeowner insurance and then bill them for it. So you could do those, you could mimic those clauses in your mortgage and note that we kind of see, traditional lenders do. So you could definitely do that, but I think it depends on how comfortable you are and whether or not you would want to see the taxes and the homeowner insurance escrowed.
Awesome. Okay, Daryl has a question.
Hey Anita, how you doing?
Hi.
Thanks for today. Got a question. Do you keep a list of any properties or sellers that are willing to do seller financing for us investors?
It's a great question. Okay, so one of the beauty of where I work and the company we've created is we're kind of like a platform, and we work with a lot of investors. We work with a lot of all kinds of people. Our biggest contract right now is Orange County, so I do all of their properties as well. But it's nice because we do get a lot of like, hey, do you know so and so are looking for this or looking for that? So I don't know if we have like a per se list of it, but we do get a lot of like chatter that comes through and connecting that we do. So I'm always happy if anybody ever wants to know, like, hey, do you know any sellers that are open to seller financing, or I have a seller financing property, do you know any buyers? I'm always happy to keep that in mind. And if you guys are generating any leads, like I know Remind does it, you could always look up properties. Like I'll tell you a little like secret. When I was buying, I actually wanted to find seller financing because I didn't want to pay the 7% interest rate. So I thought, hey, listen, I have a good amount that I could put down. Can I find a seller that'll agree to 5% interest rate? Hey, I'll take that, and I'll pay them back in 2 years. So I would look up, I remember when I was searching, I would just look up like, all right, who's got a lot of equity in their property, because those are the sellers that would be open to it, right? And some of these sellers, you could tell them, hey, you're getting some income, and that especially if it was an investment home for you, you could use the interest to write off on your capital gains, So I would, you could always pull up leads that show properties with enough equity where you could present a seller financing type of deal if it works out.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome. Anita, we have questions about subject to.
Okay.
If you would just briefly go over subject to, just what it's about.
Absolutely. Okay, so subject to is a transaction that's become much more popular. And I know for all of you that have listed properties, I bet you've all gotten some kind of fancy subject to offer with a cover letter and that says your seller can walk away with this much money and the buyer will pay all the closing costs, etc. So it's become so popular in the past couple of years. There's actually cults of it out there. But subject to is a transaction essentially where the buyer purchases the property and will take over the seller's mortgage, but the mortgage still remains in seller's name legally. Okay, so it's not an assumption of the mortgage. Assumption of the mortgage is when you do it the proper way and you go to seller's bank, and then seller and buyer say, hey, can the buyer purchase the property and assume it? And the lender will vet the buyer out, they'll agree to it, and then the buyer becomes the note holder. That's an assumption of mortgage. This is different. Subject to is a sale where the buyer takes over the seller's mortgage. Okay. And lots of gray area involved in it. In fact, I have another presentation on it. One day I could go more into it if you guys would like. But really, it's a situation, and people ask me, why would the seller agree to this? Why would the seller accept a contract like this? And usually it's because the seller is a distressed seller. So the property is either in foreclosure, or they can't afford it anymore, the monthly payments, or they've already defaulted, but a foreclosure has not been filed yet. This is when a seller may think of doing it because it could be a quick closing. It would save their credit score, right? Somebody else will take over their loan payments, right? So now they don't have to go through a foreclosure. And if they're already behind on payments, some of these buyers will come in and they'll even pay the reinstatement amount for you. So that's why some sellers will find it enticing and gravitate towards it. And I think that's the key thing I've seen in all the subject to transactions. It's where the seller is in a distressed situation where they're either in foreclosure or about to go into foreclosure, and they don't want that on their credit. And then this buyer investor comes in and says, all right, I'll buy the property. I will go ahead and take over your loan payments and I'll make the monthly payments for you. The seller doesn't own the property anymore, but the seller is still legally responsible for the loan. So you can see there's a lot of risk involved. Now, 3 years ago, when Subject 2s became popular, 3 years ago, this is what would happen. Buyer and seller would enter into a deal. Buyer would be like, okay, seller, give me your login password and your username. And once we close, I'll start making the payments. That's what used to happen 3 years ago. That's what it was. It was a handshake deal. We would close and they would exchange user info login. But over the past 3 years, the process has become much more sophisticated, and there's much more risks mitigated. So now, like in a Subject 2, there'll be a land trust involved. So when you see those cover letters, sometimes an investor will say, okay, we'll have a land trust, we'll do a wraparound mortgage or note, to make it safer, because the seller's biggest concern is, okay, I sold the property. What if you stop paying my monthly payments, buyer? What do I do? And that's when you create a land trust, and a land trustee, if the payment is missed, the property could revert back to the seller. So that's what a Subject 2 mortgage is. It's a sale with the loan not paid off and the buyer takes over.
Tammy.
You made a comment. So if you did a seller financing, so you're selling your property, but you're doing seller financing, would the capital gains be just on the amount that you get that year on a monthly basis on the payments? So you're spreading out your capital gains basically over the, okay.
Yeah. And if there's any amount that you walked away with. So once again, if you were selling for 400,000, loan was for 340, you may, after closing costs, walk away with 20, 30,000. So you may still have to pay some capital gains depending on what you walked away with.
Awesome. Carolina Estevez.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So the Subject 2, when someone does that, let's say I have a seller that's interested in doing that, would she always be responsible for that mortgage? What about if she doesn't want her name on that property anymore? So she'll be, if she wants to buy another property or finance, how would that work? Since it's a Subject 2 and she's still responsible for this mortgage, even though she technically sold it. So it doesn't sound like she actually even sold it.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I'll take it. Your first question was, is the name still on there? So in the sophisticated way, the right way to do it, what would happen is a land trust is made. Okay, an attorney is going to make a land trust, and the property will get transferred into a land trust. Okay, because the reason why they do this is there is this clause called due on sale clause, and most mortgages have that clause in there. And that clause basically says that, borrower, if you try to sell your property and not tell us about it, we can make the entire sum due at closing, or we can make the entire sum due and you'll have to pay it. So in order to kind of avoid that, what they've done is they create a land trust. The property gets transferred to a land trust. And the land trust is called like 123, Silver Street. And the beneficiary of the land trust is it becomes the buyer. So that's how the buyer owns the property. They become the beneficiary of the land trust. So whenever anyone searches to see who's the owner of the house, it's going to show this land trust. It's going to be anonymous. No one's going to know who really owns the land trust, right? Because the land trust is not public documents. So that's the first answer to your first question. The second question, that's a very good point. The loan is still active, it's open, and it's in seller's name. So if a credit check is done, seller is still going to show up on seller's credit. And then can now the seller go buy another home? And that's a great conversation to have with the seller before they get into this. Are you thinking about buying another home? Because this is going to impact you. This is going to impact your credit. You may not be eligible. Now, the Subject 2 community has gotten so smart that they've come up with answers to all of this. Sometimes what they will help do is they will once again, I'm not giving legal advice. I've just seen this done and I don't know if it's right or wrong, but they will basically come back because the property is owned in the land trust. Nobody really knows who the beneficiary is. And these sellers will say, I rent this property and I have rental income that I use to pay my mortgage. It's like a second property for me now. So that's how they kind of get around and try to get eligible for another loan to buy another home.
Awesome. Awesome.
Okay.
I have a question for you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Carolyn. I have a question for you. How many times out of 100 should agents try to draw up seller financing documents?
Never.
Thank you. How many out of a million? Never. So your paperwork with FRI, by the way, your handbook says that you will not do this without an attorney. So we are not liable if you do. So you have violated that. So please get an attorney involved. You saw all that stuff. You guys write a lot of notes and mortgages and all that stuff. I don't think that you do. You're not licensed to do so. Please do not. And don't just leave it up to unless the seller or buyer is an attorney. Even if one of them is an attorney, the other one needs to have one. So get an attorney involved. And yes, can we justify that the buyer should pay? I agree that the buyer should pay for that because that is the work that the mortgage company normally does during underwriting and all that stuff. So that is something that should be typically a buyer expense. They can agree to whatever they want, but that's what we see the most of. Caroline, do you have another question?
Yes. The other question is, they're very aggressive. These investors are very aggressive and they're really pushing this sale. Like I get 3 or 4 every single day and they're like, well, can you call your seller again? Can you do this? Can you do that? My question is this, you said it's common, but is it done in a manner where an elderly person can fall for this and then not know that all their equity on their home is taken based on the time where she had a problem or she was maybe going into foreclosure, but she had $200,000 in equity on the property, and then they buy it right from under her, and then she has no legal recourses. Is that common as well?
Yes, it is. And I'll tell you something that not these investors, when they submit those offers for subject to, they've done their homework on the property. They've done their research. They're not sending offers to every property. They're only sending it to properties where they know they're getting a discount on the purchase price, right? Because of whatever the situation the seller is in. And they're doing their homework because the seller may have a great interest rate that they want, right? Maybe that seller has a 3% interest rate. You can't find that anymore. So these investors, they've done their homework. And when they submit that offer, it is customized to that property. And sometimes they'll even say, okay, the seller can walk away with $20,000 equity, and we'll pay for all closing costs, So they make those offers because they've done the research and the homework on the property. And I can tell you something that it's a very, like I said, I have a separate presentation for this, and I have one slide just on ethical considerations for this type of transaction, because, it's a gray area, and we don't know what could happen in the future. Could these banks wake up one day and say, there's a lot of land trusts out there all of a sudden, that these properties are being transferred to. And you know what? We're going to call in all our due on sale clauses. And then what do you do? And so it's a very gray area. Or you may have a seller that comes back in the future and says, I didn't know what I was getting into. I didn't know this is what subject to meant. I didn't know that my loan's not paid off. I didn't know that I couldn't buy another house. So there are so many ethical considerations. It's such a gray area. And really, if your seller is going to entertain a subject to transaction, please have your seller talk to an attorney. Make sure seller understands what is involved, what they're going to give up, what could happen. I will tell you, as a title company, I do Our title company does handle subject to transactions. We do not, but I will not handle every subject to transaction. I will, if there is a land trust involved, if there's a land trust attorney involved, if I feel that the terms are something exceedingly unfair, I will excuse myself from it, because I think you're right, that could happen. There could be a lot of room for equity and someone could be misled to do something that doesn't make sense. Now, I do think there are some situations where the seller is really in a bind. Maybe they're about to go into foreclosure or they're already in a foreclosure, and their only option is getting foreclosed on or letting someone else come in and take over their loan. So sometimes there are dire situations, but sometimes you're very right, Carolina, there could be situations that just don't make sense and are not worth entertaining. I hope that's okay, Ryan. I shared my
Thank you, Ryan. Ryan always tells me that. So I call him all the time about this because I'm like, oh, I'm so annoyed with these investors.
Yeah. And if you think about it, if you're getting a lot of offers, there must be some potential in that property, right? There must be something there. And then you may want to step back and reevaluate, like, okay, what do we need to do to get this sold on the regular market, right? I know if I was an agent, I don't prefer the subject to route because there's just too many risks. I would only do it if my seller had no other option and it was either foreclosure or this, but if you can navigate around it and figure out what is that missing link. Maybe I need to readjust the price, or maybe we need to make a couple fixtures that will get it sold on the regular market. I would go with that.
That's my next question after this meeting.
There you go. I get that question asked a lot, Carolina. Not just you. It's a lot of you guys. When you get these subject to offers, you ask me, should I do this? Should my client do this? And I think Anita said it very well there. If they're absolutely desperate, then consider it. But definitely get legal opinion too, because you don't, make sure that you're covered, all your bases are covered. And now you're talking about getting an attorney involved. And so there goes some money too. And so make sure that it's a good deal for them. But you said something about they're so persistent, Carolina. That does not make them right or right for you or your client, just being persistent. They are typically, a lot of those people are directed to do that. A lot of them are young people and they'll keep doing it, and that's their job, is to keep doing it. And if they ever get that deal, they make some money. So they're going to keep pushing and pushing and pushing. And it's just personality things. Just because someone is persistent doesn't mean you should give in to them. Use block on your phone. Yeah. So, and I want to tell you from a real estate.
I did that yesterday on my calls and my texts because it's flooded.
I bet. So from a real estate perspective, you guys make sure, if you are going to block people or whatever that your seller has told you they're not interested, or put that, that you're not going to entertain certain offers. If you guys want to put that in your listing agreement or whatever, so you don't have the duty to show them every offer that comes in, that's ridiculous. We've already talked about that on your listing agreement. Because you guys get these lowball offers, maybe these subject to ones are well thought out because they look for certain years that you bought it. So they know what your rate is roughly. They're not going to ask you for something you bought last year because they know it was at 7.5%, but they're going to look for certain years where the rates were low, et cetera. One thing they don't do though, these cash offers that they do at 70, it's exactly 70%. They're computer generated and they're sent out, every day on your new listing, or once it's triggered by 30 days on the market or 90 days on the market. If you guys pay attention to that stuff, you'll see that that's when they're triggered, your days on market. So be sure that you're putting in there, if you're not going to present those to your sellers, that you put in your listing agreement, your seller agrees to not look at lowball offers. And you have to specify, less than 80% of asking price or whatever it is. Make sure we're covered on that. All right. Any other questions for Anita? Anita, you've been wonderful to be here this long. It was supposed to be 30 minutes and you've been here 53 minutes. So any other questions for Anita? Nope. Awesome. All right, FRI people, hang on. Anita, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. You guys have a wonderful day, and I wish you guys lots of success and hope to talk to you soon.
Anita, real quick, give us 30 seconds on the closing city.
Absolutely. Okay, so the Closing City, I mentioned this in the beginning, we're one of the fastest growing title companies in Florida. Our whole premises is built on how much we love doing closings. We genuinely do. All our escrow officers, all our staff, they're 10, 15 plus years experienced. I don't believe in much processors because I hate it when people call and they're asking 5 people for what's going on in their file. So I believe one closer, one file. That one closer talks to buyer, seller, lender, everybody. So that's sort of my philosophy. And we've created a real estate platform. I think I mentioned that as well, where we kind of, we know how to do everything. You know, like I said, we've got government contracts. We work with investors. We work with buyers, sellers, lenders, all kinds of stuff. We do it all. And I think the biggest thing is, you know, the service part, everybody will say that, right? Of course, that goes without saying. We do enjoy it. We do love what we do. But I think the hardest part of my job, and I think I take this with utmost seriousness, is I have to hold people's money. I'm a fiduciary at the end of the day, right? And this is people's hard-earned money that we hold on to, that they trust us. And so being a fiduciary is what we excel at, you know, and we're a teaching title company. So you'll see us doing CLEs. You'll see me maybe in the future coming on more calls and training you guys with different things. We have an amazing net sheet calculator. It's state of the art. So a lot of our agents will use that. So our idea is to enhance you, to make you grow, and to make you knowledgeable. And of course, you get me with it too. So that's who we are, the Closing City.
Awesome, Anita. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Everybody have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thanks. All right, guys. Hopefully you found that. Now Carolina has a question. She just left, Carolina. You're on mute.
After you finish.
Oh well, I'm pretty much done. I hope you guys enjoyed that. That was very nice of her to come in and talk about that. I get so many questions about seller financing and what should my seller do. And those of you who have asked that know that I always direct you to an attorney for all of those reasons, notes and mortgages and as Vivian said, prepayment penalties and whatever else that you guys don't think of. Lawyers have all that stuff on a template, so they know what they're doing and they can draw those up and stuff. And you can't. It is so important that they are able to repossess the property, foreclose on it. And you guys, I mean, they didn't teach you that in real estate school. So Carolina, go ahead.
Okay, so I have a couple of questions for all the agents that are experiencing this. I don't know if it's just me. So in the last, we're in February. So since November, I would say I've gotten several listings. I have 3 on the market and 1 that I'm putting on the market today, and 1 that just sold last week. But it took, I don't know, 160 days or 120 days to sell. My question to the agents is, since they changed the MLS to now where you don't offer compensation, or agents having a hard time selling their listings, and or what can be done to get the listings sold, including doing the CMA, making sure that you check the comps, if there's anything additional that can be done, because I'm noticing that it's been very difficult. I don't really get calls for the listings anymore. So I don't know if that has anything to do with it, or if people are doing other stuff to market the properties, or I'm actually in the Thompson brokerage, so I don't know if the Thompson brokerage does not have the same benefits as a brokerage that has realtors. And so I'm just struggling with that question. So I'm not sure if I'm doing everything I'm supposed to do for these listings, but it's been very different.
Okay, let me jump on a couple of those. One is the NAR has nothing to do with it, and the brokerage that you're on has nothing to do with it. Nobody can tell that on MLS that your brokerage is not a board member brokerage. And the NAR thing, it coincides with rates being high, and it coincides with the market being slow. Everybody's struggling for everything right now. And you're not getting calls. You should actually be getting more calls because people have to know what the commission is. But nobody's not doing it. I mean, some agents have dropped out, but the buyers are still out there. They just have different agents than they would have if the agent quit doing real estate because of the NAR thing. And some have, which is, like I always say, that's what you guys wanted. You guys wanted the agents who don't do anything out of the business. Now they're gone. Now's your time to kick some butt. Now's your time to get a bigger piece of the pie. So when the pie grows again, you've got a bigger piece, right? So now's your time. And I will let you guys answer what you're doing to promote your listings, what's working for you on promoting listings. I can tell you though, everybody's days on market are up. So, but if you guys are doing something that's working, please fill her in. Viv, are you responding to this, or Tammy?
Yes. Actually, I was on the same wavelength as you, Carolina, because my Davis Island listing, I was with them yesterday. They're looking to buy because they're living literally out of boxes. And they were going to wait to sell, and I'm not getting any activity. Well, one of the things I realized, there were 3 things I pointed out to them. Number 1, we're not offering buyer compensation. Number 2, the way I was promoting it as 2 buildable lots, once you get the variance, is not incentivizing builders or investors. So maybe we have to go to end users. And maybe I have to put a rendering up of a potential property they could build on that double lot instead of trying to sell it as 2 lots. So that was 2 things that we talked about. This morning, I wanted to ask y'all, should I be asking my seller to offer like a buyer bonus for anything above and beyond that their buyer agent will receive, giving the buyer agent the incentive, not the seller, or not the buyer incentive? What do y'all think?
Why are you not offering buyer brokerage compensation as a listing agent?
Because we were really selling it to originally our game plan was to get an investor or a custom builder on board.
Okay, so Vivian's talking about vacant land, and vacant land is different, and you have to be patient with vacant land. You've got very few at the top of the pyramid for buyers, people who can afford that, people who can afford to buy a property and sit on it for a while and make payments on the house they live in now and the house that the property that they're going to build on, and who want to go through a divorce, of building a house together. Typically, if it's a couple, so it's a very stressful process. And I will tell you, Vivian, from my experience, what you want to, and I do have experience in this, I love the rendering. I love giving them a picture of something that they're buying. And it's easy to get somebody to partner with you once you have a buyer. It's easy to get a builder on board once you have a buyer. And even talk to builders right now and say, hey, let's talk about what we can do here for a finished price. And even put it at, if your lots are, I don't remember what they're priced at, but if your lots are priced at $500,000 or whatever, put on there, $1.5 million house. And, with the builder saying, yes, I can build that for $1 million. Here's your estimate for building on there. And so then you have something that you're selling to somebody. Because if you're selling it, it's a lot for someone to take on. No pun intended. Yeah, and don't worry about pricing on vacant lots, guys. Don't worry about pricing. People aren't afraid to lowball you on vacant lots. It's not the price that's pushing them off, unless it's ridiculous. It's not the price that's pushing them off. They'll talk to you. People will make offers on lots. They're not scared of that. Their builder they'll have a builder, and their builder will tell them, oh, that's too much for that lot, or whatever. Let's offer this much. You guys should offer this much. So it's a different thing. You have to be patient with vacant land. There just aren't that many buyers out there and who want to do it, who can afford to do it, et cetera, especially a nice land like that, Vivian.
Well, I wanted to ask y'all one other point about this item, and then I'll obviously turn it over to you. What if I advertise in LA with that rendering and that spectacular lot and that spectacular location? Somebody who won't think $1 million for a lot is all that much out of hand. Not a local person, but somebody who might be coming from other places that has a different proportion of land value.
Well, you got it on the MLS, so it already is being done that. But if you want to pinpoint people using Facebook or something like that in New York and LA, then by all means do that.
I don't want to use Facebook. I was going to go direct to their local media. and buy
like
whatever.
what?
LA Times or whatever their local TV station maybe is. Everybody has digital advertising now, whether it's broadcast or print. So I was just going to go straight to digital.
Okay.
Direct to consumer type of thing.
Yeah, if you think that's worth it and your client thinks that's worth it, then you should do it.
I don't think that Facebook is worth it, personally. Has anybody here had success that way?
I can tell you that they have, but you have to pinpoint people in that location, where you want to advertise it. So you advertise it when you boost it for that geographical location, not for where it is, for where you want to hit people.
Right. That's what I'm saying. So I would target the ad to a certain type of Facebook user. Okay. All righty.
Yeah. Michelle can show you how to do that. We do it also. And other agents here do it. And Daryl said, put a rendition. I absolutely believe that. Give them a vision of what they can build. And tell them they can build whatever, obviously you put on there, it's a rendition, they can build whatever. Another thing I think, Vivian, is I would go ahead and pay whatever it costs assuming it can be done to divide the lots.
That was a conversation we had. One of the neighbors is actually working on. It's not that they have to divide the lots, is that they were platted as 2 lots originally, and then the frontage was updated when building codes were updated for that area. So an original 50-foot frontage is now a 75-foot frontage, and that's what ate into their secondary. But they have 2 addresses. It's platted on the whatever as 2 lots, but they have a house in the middle of it, which is going to be torn down. And also, should we be, sorry, I hate to do this, but I really need some advice. What about offering a buyer agent bonus? Is that still okay, or is that out of line with the new MLS rules?
Oh, you can offer whatever you want. They've got to go back to their BBA though and get the buyer to sign off on it.
Okay.
Because if they've got 3%, you can't do 3% plus 20,000.
Right.
Unless you go back and do that. And so the buyer's got to say, oh, so you're making 3% and an extra 20. That's interesting.
Right. And that's why we didn't offer any of it at the beginning. We didn't know what relationships were going to be like after the changes. So we said, oh, let's just ride the tide and offer nothing and see what happens. Obviously, that's not working.
I like it, but you're talking about now, but when you're offering a bonus, you're actually talking about an agent saying, I wouldn't show this property normally, but since I'm getting an extra 10 grand or 20 grand or something, I'm going to show this property. They're going to show your $1 million lot anyway. So I don't know how much.
I mean, really, they could drive by all day long, but there's nothing really to see there.
Right. No, but that's what I'm saying. And they've got them on an auto search already. Anyway, the client's going to see it and say whether they like it or not.
Okay.
And so there's a home there that's of incidental value, just a knockdown?
The home is a tear down because the first hurricane damaged it, but the second one finished it off.
Have they thought about demoing it, getting it out of there?
Yeah, that's part of what we're going to offer as a buyer incentive. They're going to pay for the demo.
Okay.
An accepted offer.
Okay, got it.
So should I pay for an appraisal at this point?
Get it back? If you're talking about a lot of that value, yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you all very much.
It shouldn't be very expensive. All right, Daryl. I'm sorry, Tammy. Then Daryl.
So I was going to ask the same thing with houses sitting longer. Are we normally you do price reductions because you feel like that's going to stir up some activity? Are people doing price reductions, or are you just sitting at the price? I just told my people to say today that I think we should, you should consider maybe a price reduction to possibly stir up some activity. It's been like 30 days. So is that kind of still the same strategy?
I would do very small. You can do what you want. What I see working is very small price reductions. If you want to, that's not what I see working. But if you want to hit people's searches again, but up your seller concessions, because properties are still appraising. Prices haven't
Okay.
officially dropped. Properties are still appraising.
Okay.
And so,
So drop it less and offer a seller concession then.
yes, that is what people
Okay.
are finding attractive, and the property will still appraise.
Okay, good. All right, thank you.
Daryl.
I also, on my listings that are sitting there on the market too long, I changed the details. I changed the write-up, and sometimes I add, sometimes I subtract. I just go through and I read it again over and over, and I do that like once every 1 or 2 weeks. Plus, I also look at the pictures. I might change up the pictures. I did that the one in College Park, because my picture that I put on, I noticed wasn't showing the 2-car garage. And if I had another picture that showed the 2-car garage, because it was over to the right of the front of the house. So I put on another picture to make sure that the 2-car garage was shown, and that sold in like 2 weeks as soon as I did that. So I always tweak it like every 1 or 2 weeks, the details. And like I said, I add and I subtract. I do both. And when you do that, it's if somebody has the searches saved, it pops up as a new, the details changed. So it pops up like a new property. So it comes up on their feed again. So,
And all you're changing is what?
I'm changing like the details of the write-up. I changed the write-up, and I changed maybe a picture or two.
Okay, so changing public remarks and changing a picture or two changes. Okay.
Put them in a different order or something, or mention something, or subtract something. That's what I normally do.
Okay, cool.
Ryan, did you say to lower the price in increments of?
Yeah, no, very small. But that was the point of that mostly is to have it come on to people's searches and say, price reduced.
What's very small?
But if I mean, you can lower it $100. I mean, it doesn't matter. But what Daryl's saying is you can get it refreshed on people's thing for nothing. I do like that the price came down a little, shows that they're a little negotiable. But if he's getting it popping back up on people's things without changing the price, I didn't know you could do that. And not messing with any of the terms. That's great. Tammy.
Okay, we go too long. I'm like, what was my question? Shoot, I've totally forgot it. Hang on. What was my question?
Daryl's fault. He talked for too long. Oh, Daryl writes his down.
Oh, I know what it was. Got it. I have a lender, and he told me that he's got a program that is essentially a no down payment. They will take the 3.5% that you would put down FHA, and they will make that as a second mortgage. And he said the payment on that's like $78 a month. And so essentially they can, do a no down payment, still have closing costs, but depends how you write your deal. You might could get those from the seller. So there's that available. And I think, is that not a problem, or is it a problem to write something like that in public remarks? That please, I just did it. Hopefully, I think it's fine. But, ask about our preferred lender.
Yeah. Ask about a preferred lender. Yes. Don't make any promises of what they can do.
Yeah. Ask our. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, that's available if anybody needs it for a buyer. It might help if they don't have a whole lot of money.
Okay. Cool. Will you put that info in the chat?
I'm driving. Sorry.
Pull over and put it in the chat, Tammy.
Okay.
I'm kidding. Drive carefully. Don't do that. Drive carefully.
Okay.
All right, Mary Lou. You're on.
Okay.
There you go.
Yeah, one I want to ask, on my own home house listing on the market is too long. I want to off the market. So is any way how long I have to put back in the market as the new listing? Do I need to wait for
60 days?
60 days. Oh,
60 days.
okay. 60 days. Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Awesome. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Any other questions before we go? Awesome. I want to show you something real quick, actually. Since we did seller financing, you guys are going to have more questions about that. And I want to show you this real quick. This is what you turn in with it when you do one. You turn in, this is the second page. The first one's about Dodd-Frank and who has to disclose and who doesn't. Is this a one-off for them, or are they in the business of doing seller financing? All right. So, but this is the important part that you'll turn in with each. Well, it's all important, but this is the part you'll fill out. Seller agrees to hold a note, a first or second purchase money mortgage. So typically it's going to be a first, right? You're going to get 20% down or whatever, and then this. And the principal amount of blank at blank percent interest. So what they're doing here is they're agreeing on general terms before you take it to a lawyer. You don't want to hire a lawyer and have them end up disagreeing on how long they're going to hold the note and what the percentage is going to be. That's kind of big points. So this is what in commercial real estate, we kind of figure this stuff out on a letter of intent, right? You guys have heard of that before? That's where they get all the terms done before they give it to high-priced attorneys to spend hours on it. They agree to all the important stuff, and then they work out the details. So fully amortized for, if you want to do this for a 3-year balloon, like what she was saying, you just do 3. And then you fill this stuff out. Our balloon, here it is. Here is where we do this. Not fully amortized. We're just doing it for 3 years for a term of 3. All right. So that means we're going to pay interest on it and amortize it for 3 years, and then they owe the rest of the $300,000 or how much ever it is. Okay, so which means what they're doing when they buy one like this, the buyer is thinking in 3 years I'll be able to get a mortgage. Okay, maybe in 1 year. It's almost like a bridge loan. Okay, so that's what they're thinking. Sometimes it'll be 1 year, 5 years, whatever it is. And so what you do is you agree to all this stuff before you go with a contract. This is a rider to the contract. This is rider C. This one's for the as is. There's one also for the crisp. And that's what you're doing. Okay. So you will fill this out with the contract. And so they're agreeing to the major terms of this before they go forward. Just wanted you guys to see that in case you have any questions on that. Any other questions before we go? We are leaving. All right, guys. There are new tutorials on paperless pipeline under the reference tab on how to use paperless pipeline, a couple other things we'll talk about later. And that's it. Oh, Carolina, yes, one more time.
Where are people getting their comps from? I used to do RPM, but it's no longer available to me.
The RPR?
RPR.
Yep, it is. Where are you guys getting your comps from? I just pull comps. I just pull comps from the search function of what's.
Yeah, you can put the neighborhood, copy and paste the neighborhood that you're selling in into the subdivision, and see everything in the subdivision active, pending, and sold.
Yeah.
And then go with the comps in that neighborhood.
I'm just wondering if I'm doing anything wrong. I've been doing the same, and I used to do RPR just to see if I'm off or if it's too high but okay.
So,
Caroline, if you need an RPR, you can ask me too.
Yeah, and also don't forget you have public record when you go to that property detail for that.
Yeah, it says it.
It'll give you comparable sales that may not be on MLS, but it'll give you a heads up on what's moving.
Yeah.
Also, at the top of the listing, when you bring the listing up, I think there's a little section that you can hit comps on that listing, on the listing.
It's on your phone. It's on your phone, but not on the actual MLS. I haven't seen it.
No, it's on I could get it from a desktop. I'll have to go home and look at it, and I'll text you.
Okay. All right.
I'll take a picture of it.
Thank you. Need to get some sales done, guys. Let's do this.
That's right.
All right. Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, Carolina. Any other questions or comments before we go? All right, guys. Thank you so much for coming. Hopefully you guys got something out of that for seller financing today, subject to all that stuff. And hang in there, guys. We're doing great. Market is going to pick back up. So hang in there. I'll talk to you soon. Bye, everybody.